get ourselves going. Okay, everyone. I would like to start by acknowledging the traditional owners of the land in which we are all at and pay our respects to the elders past, present and emerging. Welcome to tonight's session. So tonight's webinar is on the basics of Montessori. So what is it? Is it what you've read online? And we will focus a lot on what you can do at home and a little bit about what happens in the classroom, the sensitive periods, the development of the child between 0 to 6. My video will be off just so that I'm not distracted by all the faces in the side there. So first things first, a little bit about me. So my name is Rebecca Grugan. I am a mum of 2 boys, an 8-year-old and a 3-year-old, Liam and Owen. I am the owner of I AM Montessori, and we have been around for the last 7 and a bit years. I am a consultant for Townsville Montessori and have been working with Michaela and Andrew to get a centre started in Townsville for the last 2.5 years. The magic of the story between I AM Montessori and Townsville Montessori is that Michaela and Andrew's boys were the first children to come to my first centre 4 years ago down here in Brisbane. And it has been awesome to see them fall in love with Montessori when they were with us, but then also to fall in love so much with it that they wanted to bring it to their community up there. And I'm a big advocate for Montessori in general, and for parents being able to access Montessori more than we have been able to over the last few years. I own 2 centres down here in Brisbane, and we also got Montessori into a state school system with its first year this year. Okay, so what we will cover tonight, the myths and misconceptions of Montessori, the principles of Montessori and the features of a Montessori education, what we aim to develop in every child, the 4 planes of development, a little bit on sensitive periods that children go through in these first 6 years, the importance of the adult in a Montessori education. We talk about choices, freedoms and limits, the prepared environment at home and in the classroom, and some things you can do at home, and there will be the ability to ask questions at the end of the session. And I can see how I can help you there. So a little bit, when you first hear about Montessori, it might have been that you drove past a sign and wondered what that word meant, or somebody in a parenting group spoke about this mystery, and then you went on a journey trying to figure out what it was. Sometimes you'll hear that, it's that place where children run free, there's no discipline. And then you'll also have people who hear the complete opposite, which is it's that place where it's too strict, the children can't do anything that they want. That it's unstructured learning, it's free range, to it's too cold and it's too structured, the children can't have any choice in anything. Sometimes you'll hear that it's only for gifted children, so children who, have an inner genius, or the complete opposite to that, of suitable for only for challenged children and children with additional needs. And the one that to me you hear it's only for people with money is probably the only one that had a little bit of truth in it, especially in Australia, up until the last 5 years, where more and more Montessori centres have been opening and allowing access for more children and being priced affordably. And that's been a goal of I AM Montessori's as well. But up until that last sort of half a decade, it has been a place where, especially for schools, that only people with money could afford to send their children. The Montessori Principles. So Montessori is child-led. It is We focus on each individual child and we go with their interests and create and prepare the environment based on those child's needs and those interests. We educate with all the senses. Maria Montessori believes that the hand and the brain work together. And so you'll find the sensorial element of a classroom is extremely important for when we are teaching any concepts educationally, whether it's maths, language, anything. The senses is taken into consideration across all the decisions that are made in a Montessori environment. Respect and dignity for the child is absolutely vital. The way we treat a child, the way we speak to a child, and the way we, what we believe the child is capable of is all extremely important with the way in which we approach early childhood education. The prepared environment, without it, you can't have Montessori, but you don't need to have, it's not about all of the materials in the classroom. It's a lot more than that, and it's about all of the elements coming together to make it a Montessori setting. The adult's role is to guide the child. We don't stand at the front of the classroom and tell all the children what to do. We are next to them, helping them through their own learning journey. The miracle of observation, so being able to actually sit on your hands and learn how to observe a child and read the room, is an extremely important part of Montessori and a discipline that the educators and teachers, guides need to learn. And as a parent, it is something that if you can learn it and do it well, it can be an amazing asset to your parenting toolbox. Movement, so the hand and mind working together, as I said before, all of those senses coming together. And choice and freedom. Without choice and freedom in the room, the child's will or desire to learn new things or to discover dwindles away, especially as they get older. So in a Montessori education, and that's the whole way through from birth until they finish high school at 18, they are multi-aged classes. So they're grouped by stage of development. So you traditionally see it as 0 to 3, 3 to 6, 6 to 9, 9 to 12, 12 to 15, and 15 to 18. In early childhood centres in Australia, you may see that it might be 0 to 12 months or 15 months, 15 months to 3 years, and then 2.5 to 6. And those children move through those cycles as they're developmentally reach that capacity. So you might have a 2.5-year-old who is ready for Children's House, but you also may have a 3-year-old who's not ready for Children's House. And it's really understanding and learning how to observe those children to make sure that we can set that child up for success, because we don't want them to fail. The feature of the Montessori education is an uninterrupted work cycle. So it's really important we talk about this 3-hour work cycle. And it allows for the child or children to go really deep with their work. When everything is laid out for them, and every 15 minutes or 10 minutes they're moving from one activity to the other as a group and dictated by the adult, they don't have the chance to actually learn how to focus on something, and they don't have the chance to repeat or really go deep on an interest that they have. Some of the maths work and the things in the prepared environment can take hours to do. Sometimes the children, they'll put their name on it and they continue on it on their next day when they're there. So it's really allowing that time for the children to go through what we call false fatigue and to go into deep work. Individual programs, intrinsic motivation and independent learning. So what we are wanting to do, we program for each child individually, and you won't find a lot of group activities. There will be small groups and there might be, a couple working together or having a lesson at the same time, but majority of the work is based on the child's individual needs. What we want is for the child to be intrinsically motivated. So we want them to complete a task and feel that success within themselves and not be looking at an adult to see if they did a good job or not. Later in the presentation, I'll talk about the materials and why they are a certain way, and you'll see how that internal reward comes from the way in which the materials are designed. And obviously independence, which is a big thing for children between that 2 and 6 years that they're really striving for. Self-discipline and responsibility. So the ability to go back to work, to complete a task, to finish a cycle of work. The way in which a Montessori classroom is designed and works allows for children to have that innate, for that to be built into them. Concrete materials with control of error and self-correction. So some of the materials, most of the materials in a Montessori environment are designed so that the child doesn't need an adult to tell them if they're right or wrong. So it might be the knobbed cylinders where there is 10 of them and they change in diameter and depth. They're putting that puzzle, they're putting them back together and one's not fitting correctly. That is showing them, without anybody else telling them if they're right or wrong, that is showing them that they need to do something to make it work and to make it better. So that is where that control of error in the materials comes into play. It's also a holistic approach. So we don't just look at the academic and education side of things. It's all intertwined. The social and emotional and spiritual abilities of the child and their development is as important, if not more important, than any of the academic outcomes that they might get from being part of a Montessori environment. Okay. So our aims to develop in each child is absolutely a love of learning. And over the last 7 years, I've had I've been so lucky to see children and they go from birth to starting primary school and seeing their drive and that flame in their eyes to want to learn, and their curiosity is because it's completely nurtured in a Montessori setting. It's there as they move into that third, second plane of development. The concentration, persistence, and coordination. In a Montessori setting, you can see children working on the same material. They might be 18 months old and they're spending half an hour doing the one thing. The ability for us as people, as humans, to be able to sit down and concentrate and persist and work through something, that resilience, we don't get that a lot in a lot of children, but in a Montessori environment, it is absolutely provided, and they're given the time to develop those skills. The self-discipline, as I spoke about before, independence and responsibility, and the creative self-expression. So one of those other myths might be that Montessori doesn't allow for creativity or art. It actually is in everything. Every part of a Montessori education, that child is developing to who they are meant to be and who they will become. So that creativity is actually in all elements of a Montessori environment. So there is 4 planes of development. We are talking about the first plane here, which is the 0 to 6. Then they'll move into the second plane of development, which is 6 to 12, 12 to 18, the third plane, and 18 to 24. Being that fourth one. This part of a Montessori education, or the philosophy and why this matters so much, is a really big subject and not one that we can cover in one night at all. But it just gives you an idea of how Montessori sees the child and sees the human and our development over those first 24 years. A lot of her work, most of her work, was done in that 0 to 6 phase. The first plane of development is divided into 2, as I said earlier. So you've got your subplane of 0 to 3, and you've got then your 3 to 6. So they take on everything really, really fast. They go through lots of sensitive periods at the same time, and then they start to put into action all of those things that they learned in that first 3 years, and that's when you're getting that drive for independence. And as an adult, you may find that there's that battle between the child wants to do all of these things and we don't want them to do it, and not understanding that child needs to do certain things. So that is where society sometimes calls it terrible twos or three-nagers, where from a Montessori setting, we don't see it like that. What we want to do is prepare an environment to support the child through that part of their development. So on sensitive periods, Maria Montessori believes that the child has an internal guidance system that leads them to each new step in their development. So a sensitive period is a time span in which the child is more open to take on new knowledge than any other time of their life. So in that first, they're born, their goal is to move and from a survival tactic be able to get to their own food. So they're mastering their gross motor abilities, and then they're wanting to get their independence so that they can survive without an adult. Then they're going through, and I'll show you on the next slide, they have at 2 they go through all of these different sensitive periods at the same time. So on this amazing graph from Nicole Kavanagh, that there's all these different sensitive periods from 0 to 6, and lots of them, as you can see, cross over. So we have the sensitive period for language, which is from birth all the way to 6, but it kicks off around that age of 2 mark. And it's like all of a sudden your 2-year-old wakes up and is talking sentences, whereas the day before it felt like they only had a few words. Then you match that with the refining of the senses at around that 2.5 phase. They have that and language, and then toilet learning and the sense of order all at the same time, and that comes together where their brain and their body are trying to work together and get on the same page, and it's not happening. So it's a really confusing time and a difficult time for the child, especially if it's not if they're not allowed the space to go through it. So the sensitive period for language begins at birth and goes the whole way through the first plane. Our baby hears his mother's voice and watches her lips and tongue. By the age of 6, with almost no direct teaching, the child will have acquired a large vocabulary, basic sentence patterns, and the inflections and the accents of language. They will continue to acquire more complex sentence structures and to extend his vocabulary throughout the childhood. If a child has not been exposed to language, so reading, listening, singing, writing, often during this period he may be irrevocably damaged. So they talk about the importance of reading in early childhood. It's not just to make books interesting. It's for so many different things. When you read aloud, and I bring it up on another slide later, that child is taking in more words than if they were being forced to read on their own. Maria Montessori believed that it was particularly important for adults to converse with children throughout this period and continually enriching their language and giving them every opportunity to learn new words. So if we took a 12-month-old on the train and we were talking about, they pointed out bird, if we knew the species of bird, we would be trying to use the language. So, magpie, crow, parrot, giving them, rather than just giving them bird, we're giving them all of this depth of language, and we're using the proper language so that rich language is what they hold on to as they develop into the further years. Another sort of thing that I tell parents who are finding their children not interested in reading or anything like that as they hit the 4 or 5 is your child seeing you read? Are you reading at home, not just because you have to for work, but for enjoyment? That's something that you can do at home to really help the child through that language phase. You've got the sensitive period for movement. So when the young child learns to walk at around 12 to 15 months, they have a need to perfect the skill. They'll walk and keep walking, and if they fall over, they'll get back up. All of that, they'll continue to go until they master it, and then obviously they move on to running. And we all know that if we try to go to a restaurant with an 18-month-old, it's not the same as it was when they were a baby, because they're off everywhere. It is underestimated how long a child can walk for. Once they are allowed to do it at their pace, however, the adult must be aware that they have no concept of time and they love to explore. So another thing you can do at home through this period is to leave your house and go for a walk and let the child dictate which direction you go. So, and slow down to their pace and see the world from their angle. During this period, the child is moving from being helpless into an active being, and as we all know, this is when the real fun begins. We also then have the sensitive period for order. So some of you may have noticed your child is starting to line up all their cars, or when their clothes or socks aren't matching, they get really distressed by it. This appears in the first year and continues through to the second year. During this time, the child is striving to sort out and categorize all his experiences. It makes it easier for them if there is some kind of order in their lives. They like to be cared for in the same way by a primary caregiver in a familiar environment. So That's why it's really important in an early childhood setting, but also if they're young enough and at home, is to try and have some stability in the carers and the educators for that child, especially in that sensitive period. The child needs consistency and familiarity so that he can orientate himself and construct a mental picture of the world. So this need is particularly evident in the child from about the age of 18 months. During this sensitive period, change can be very upsetting, and even a minor change can feel like the end of the world for them. Providing order in a child's life helps the child to become orientated. This is why the prepared environment is so important for the young child. Order helps the child to orientate himself and organize his mind. So in a Montessori setting, our classrooms don't change often. It means that children can come into a space that is designed for them, and all of the furniture is child sized. They're comfortable in it, but it's predictable. The furniture is going to be where it is the next day that they come. If you have to make a change in a Montessori setting, we usually try to do that with the children whilst they're there, so that they're a part of it. But what can happen in a lot of mainstream settings is the educators are bored in the room, so they just move the furniture around without consulting the children, and then the children come in and that there is no order for them. So you're rebuilding that trust in that child and trying to get them stable again in that space. So that's the sensitive period for order. A sensitive period to social aspects, so grace and courtesy. At the age of about 2.5, the child becomes aware that he is part of a group. So until then, they're really quiet. They play by themselves. They're only concerned about the things that are in front of them. They begin to show an intense interest in other children around their own age, and they gradually start to play with them in a cooperative way. So there's a sense of cohesion, which Maria Montessori believed came about spontaneously, and it was not directed by internal drive. So she noticed that at this stage of the development, children begin to model themselves on adult social behavior, and they gradually acquire the social norms of whatever group they're in. So this is an ideal time for developing social convention and manners, rules, grace and courtesy. They're very important throughout this sensitive period. So in a Montessori setting, in a children's house, as part of our practical life curriculum, we have the grace and courtesy lessons. So that can be teaching children how to open and close a door, how to clean away their plate when they're finished, how to approach their friend if they're not happy with something that's been done. We talk about the peace table and conflict resolution. All of those are part of that grace and courtesy curriculum, which is really purposeful and really obvious for those in a children's house. So during this period, you may also find that children need and want to be accepted by anybody, including their parents, friends and family. So circle time and group play, these are extremely beneficial to a child who's in that sensitive period. The other one you might notice when your keys go missing or you can't find things at home is the sensitive period for small objects. So when the child reaches its first year, they become more mobile and they're in a larger environment. They want to explore everything. They are drawn to small objects such as insects, pebbles, stones and grass. They may pick something up, look at it closely and maybe put it in their mouth. The urge to pay attention to detail that children of this age have is part of their effort to build up an understanding of their world. Sometimes, though, I feel like the sensitive period for small objects never ends, and I think that's how Coles and Woolies, they play to that sensitive period, even for us as adults with their small objects. So the sensitive period for refining the senses. So from the moment the child is born, they receive impressions from the world through their 5 senses. We talk about their sight and hearing, and then gradually, as movement develops, the sense of touch and smell play a big role, followed by the sense of taste as they start to try more foods. By taste and touch, the child can absorb the qualities of the objects in their environment, therefore allowing the neurological structures of language to be developed. So the tongue and the hands are more connected to man's intelligence than any other part of his body. Montessori referred to them as the instruments of man's intelligence. This interest in sensory experience and the activities which they stimulate help to refine the child's senses. Maria Montessori recommended that a baby be kept close to their caregivers so that he can see everything and hear what is going on around them. Then as soon as he can move around, he needs plenty of freedom so that they can explore. The child needs this sensory exploration in order to develop to its full potential. There's lots of other sensitive periods, including toilet learning and music and reading, writing, and mathematics. But that, again, same as the 4 planes of development, is a whole session on itself. So 2 challenging stages in this first 6 years of life. Around that 9 months, awareness of strangers without object permanence. So a baby might have been, 5 or 6 months old and happy to go to grandma and granddad or one of your, aunties and mum's best friend. And then all of a sudden they start to, they hit 9 or 11 months and they start to be really distraught when mum or dad leave the room, or for some of those who are in care, when their primary educators leave the space. It is really important to encourage and support a child through this period. Object permanence is when something is there and then disappears and reappears. They're going through the phase of understanding that something is going to come back. So in a toddler community, so Townsville Montessori, we have a children's house, but in a toddler community, you may use the object permanence boxes where they post a ball and it automatically rolls back and gets harder and harder. They post coins and they have to open a drawer to find that it's reappeared. So all of these activities help the child through this developmental phase. Then, as I said earlier, around that 2 years of age, when they drive to establish their self as an individual, we really want to support their independence, offer limited choices, allow for their individuality, and to use natural consequences where possible. The importance of the adult, and that is the educators, but that is parents primarily. So from the very beginning, the child constructs themselves according to how they think others feel about them. So the only way, as an example, the only way you know how your hair looks is that you can actually look into a mirror. And eventually, as you continually look at that image, you start to understand what your hair looks like. Children know who they are from the reflections they see of themselves in the adults around them. So as children get older, if they're continually told that they're annoying or that they are disruptive or they're the naughty child, they'll eventually believe that, and then they act that role out because that is now the image that they see themselves at, so they play to it. So language when talking to children is extremely important, but that image, the importance of you as the adult and forming that is absolutely key in the first 6 years of life, but pretty much all the way through. Now, this article by Alfie Cohn is amazing, and I'm only going to touch on it because it's quite long, but the link is there. And for those who are part of Townsville Montessori's Facebook page, if you don't follow it already, follow it, and we'll share the links on there. But he talks about 5 reasons to stop saying good job. So when we have educators start in a Montessori environment and it's their first, one of the first things we say is talking about intrinsic motivation and the reasons why we don't say good job. This article explains why. So, 1, manipulating children. So he talks about offering a verbal reward to reinforce the behaviour of a 2-year-old who eats without spilling. Who benefits from this? Is it possible that telling kids they've done a good job may have less to do with their emotional needs, more so to do with our convenience? So it's very much like tangible rewards. It's a way of doing something to children to get them to comply with our wishes. The reason praise can work in the short run is that young children are hungry for our approval. And he goes into more depth in the article about that. Creating praise junkies. So praise may increase kids' dependence on us. The more we say, I like the way you, or good, cooking, or good cleaning up your room, the more kids come to rely on our evaluations, our decisions about what's good and bad, rather than learning to form their own judgments. So, they might think they did a good job, but what happens the day that you say they didn't, and they've built up this reliance on your feedback of whether they've done a good or bad job? Stealing a child's pleasure. So apart from the issue of dependence, a child deserves to take delight in their own accomplishments, to feel pride in what they're learning how to do. So she also deserves to decide when to feel that way. So every time we say good job, we're telling a child how to feel. So what if you say good job, but they actually don't feel that like they were that successful at it? The most notable feature of a positive judgment isn't that it's positive, but that it's a judgment. And people, including kids, don't like being judged. We talk about losing interest, and he also talks about reducing achievement. But as I said, that is another big part. But one of the things you'll see in a Montessori environment is we really try hard not to say good job. And for those new to Montessori, it can be one of the hardest parts of working in a Montessori setting. So the importance of the adult in the environment: instead of reacting to misbehavior in anger, it's much more respectful and effective to use a calm and firm voice. It's also a lot easier for me to say that than it is when I'm actually with my own children. So when a child misbehaves, never call them bad or mean or lazy. What we want to do is label the deed or what's happened and remind the child of appropriate behavior. So we really want to move away from labeling the child or the person as that word, but more about the behavior. So physical punishment not only demeans a child's self-respect, it can make him feel that he too has the right to hurt others, really avoiding empty threats. So sure, there's got to be one of you who had the same parent I did, where, you know, you'd be driving in the car and you'd be with your sisters fighting and they'd say, if you don't be quiet, I'll pull over and you can walk home. But she never actually did that because it would probably be illegal. But avoiding empty threats. So because as children, we see through that, and then when something does matter, it doesn't have the same weight that it needs to have when it needs to happen. If you continually reward children for good behaviour, you teach them to expect payment just for following the rules. Why can't it just be an expectation that good behaviour happens all the time, rather than something special that has to be recognised? Despite their protests, children want and need firm guidance. So setting appropriate limits actually helps a child feel safe. And we talk about limits and choices now. So when we're talking about choices, learning and well-being are improved when children have a sense of control and choice in their life. So it might be the ability to choose what they're having for afternoon tea. So that could be, you know, you can have an apple or carrot, or apple, carrot, and banana. So they still have a choice, but you've put some controls in there. Because if you say, what do you want for afternoon tea? And they say chocolate, and you say, we don't have any, or you know you can't have chocolate. Well, they start to cry because the way you asked the question was open-ended, which means that we should be able to deliver on what we've said. So one of the things we try to teach educators is, when you are asking a question or offering a choice, putting those what are safe choices to the child from the beginning, rather than being open-ended. We only offer choice when it is really a choice. So some of that can come into play with clothing. You know, it's the middle of winter, not that you really have one up there in Townsville, but you know, they want to wear their bathing suit in the middle of winter, and if they did, it wouldn't be good for them health-wise. So giving them 2 or 3 outfits that they can choose from, or a range of clothes that meet, you know, whether it's going to a wedding or whatever it is, but allowing them choice, and then letting them have it. So just because you don't love it, you have to respect that child's creative expression and freedom. Point out possible consequences if necessary. So you know, I talk about when Liam was younger, he wanted to wear gumboots everywhere. And I always said, you know, you need to wear your gumboots with socks. You need to wear your gumboots with socks. And, you know, there's one time he refused. He wanted to wear his gumboots. He didn't want to wear socks. And so I pointed out the consequences of, you know, if you don't wear socks and we're walking through the shops, you may end up with blisters and your feet will be sore. I don't want to wear socks. I don't want to say, okay, that's fine. You do what you want to, but I have pointed out what might happen. You know, within 10 minutes of walking through the shops, his feet were sore, and he ended up having to be in the trolley for the rest of that trip. because his feet were sore. Now, as much as to me that was a safe natural consequence, I'd pointed it out, and then from then on we never had an issue about wearing socks with gumboots, because he had actually followed through and experienced the reason why we do certain things. So sometimes you need to allow the child to experience those natural consequences, obviously only when it's safe. When we talk about limits, we want to be clear and have clear, explicit and known limits, create the sense of order and security that the child needs. There are children who need really clear limits more than others, but all children need some form of a limit. But some really, really, really want to know what the black and white lines that they can be in are, because they really want to stay, they feel safe staying within it. Those limits need to be consistent, and this is one that's really hard for parents who we're tired and it's the afternoon, it might be a Thursday, and this Thursday they can stay up till 9 o'clock because we can't be bothered doing the night routine, or they're fighting us on it, so it's like whatever. But the next Thursday it's not the same, and they've got to be in bed at their normal 7 o'clock time. Those limits, or iPads are another one. You say 10 minutes or an hour, and then 4 hours later they're still on it. When it's not predictable, or those consistency is not there, that is where the breakdowns happen from the child, because nothing is making sense to them. So if a limit needs to change, we need to give them the why and how it's going to happen. So even for those who've got teenagers, we talk about, you need to be home by 10 o'clock now instead of 11 because, X, Y, Z has happened, and this is how we can ensure that you can meet those limits. Because when you give somebody the why, and it's the same in a workplace, we miss the why, and we lose their ability to understand why something's changing. So for instance, with adults, that can be deadlines, and how that makes you feel internally. Imagine being a child when those limits are changed for them. They're fact, so there is no need to get emotional about them, and don't get drawn into that debate. If it is a limit and you have a reason why you need to do it, as the child gets older, you can obviously get their feedback in on it, but if it's non-negotiable, then it's non-negotiable, and that's where you draw the line and you confidently stay there. There's no need to anticipate conflict. It may not actually happen. And know that limits are being tested. It's usually a desire for the child for more security. Freedom within limits. So a child needs freedom within limits to act independently, to choose their own tasks, to work at their own pace and rhythm, to repeat an action as much as they can or want to, and the opportunity to follow interests and inner developmental needs. So I spoke about, the ability to choose what they wear, the ability to choose what they eat to an extent. You can give freedom within limits and boundaries that you create, which help that child through that development. We do that in the classroom in a Montessori setting, but it's something that you can definitely work on and do at home. Really hard to start off with, but it's something to just, even if that's the one thing you take away from tonight, is if you've got a 3-year-old, allowing some freedom and choice within the limits and boundaries you've created can really help that child's development and to help parenting become easier for you. So the next part we talk about is the prepared environment. So we talk about it in the classroom, but also very much at home, because a lot of you have chosen Montessori to send your child to, but then you're wanting to know how can you support that child's education, or how can you do the philosophy from home. So there's 5 curriculum areas in a Montessori environment. We've got practical life, which is care of self, care of environment, care of each other. So grace and courtesy falls into there. Learning how to cut food, dress themselves, look after plants, look after animals. All of those things fall under the practical life part of the curriculum. We then have sensorial. Sensorial is all learning concepts. It might be the touch tablets where it's grading things from smoothest to roughest, to the sound boxes, which is, you know, softest to loudest, using all of the senses, and all of the sensorial materials is the foundation for mathematics. So in a children's house, you have a clear mathematics area as well. And things like the pink tower in the sensorial space may just look like 10 cubes from smallest to biggest. However, you know, we are giving the child the subliminal understanding of, you know, the unit, the way we do numbers by, you know, there is 1,000 of those smallest cubes in the largest cube. So they have that imprint from working with those cubes, but they also have the language. So when we get to the mathematics work, they've already got that connection and understanding. And because the difference between that smallest cube and that big one, it's 1,000 of those small ones, they feel that weight difference. They understand that 1,000 is bigger than 1. We have the language area, which is not just the materials in the classroom or the things like the movable alphabet or sandpaper letters. It's also the language we as the adults use in the environment as well. So instead of, you know, saying nana or cute words, we're using banana. We're using real rich language to increase and capitalize on for that child's development, to give them as much access to good language as possible. And then you've got culture, which I always talk about, has all of the ologies in it: biology, zoology, geography. All of those things fall into culture, as well as you know, PE, arts and music all fall under the culture part. So Montessori Children's House will normally have the 5 curriculum areas, and it's quite obvious where you would find them. So as I spoke about previously, the adult is an essential part of the environment. The younger the child, the more the adult is the environment. When lots of people have their first baby, they think they need to have all of these things and all of these toys, whereas the adult is actually the most important part in that child's development. And take away all of those toys, you have things in your environment that the child is way more interested in, like your Tupperware drawer or cupboard, and matching, you know, lids to fit containers. All of that is sensorial work. You know, the things, the spoons and the rolling pins, the textures of them, they're all different for a child. So it's not about the toys and the material, the toys in the space, and especially as they are babies to that 18 to 2 years old, you as the adult are the most important thing, and the way you talk to them, the way you interact with them. Our children require a safe environment, both physically and psychologically. It doesn't mean eliminating all risk, but obviously really looking to provide safety as they develop. Materials in this plan of development, 0 to 6, should be real objects from the real world, scaled to allow the child to experience success. So what we don't want to do is give a 2-year-old child a 2-litre jug and expect them to successfully pour water into their small glass. You want to have a jug that is sized so that the child can manage it and pour that water successfully, which is why as Montessori teachers, when you travel the world or go to op shops, we get so excited when we find mini jugs and baskets and things that we know are smaller size versions of the real thing, because we know how much the children love them and we know how successful they're going to be at it. Another part, which is a whole nother subject, which is hard for me because my mum's a fairy and has been my whole life doing children's parties, but fantasy-based subjects such as fairies, superheroes, things like that, we don't have them in a Montessori environment because it limits the child's capacity to understand what is real and what is not. So till about the age of 5.5, the child doesn't know whether, you know, Superman, they don't know that Superman is not real. No offense for any of the adults who believe Superman is real, he may be. But we talk about real objects. Fantasy is actually adult derived content, as in somebody created that superhero or magical creature. they will naturally gravitate to that as they get older. But what we're talking about, we want imagination. So we want to provide as many real life experiences and talk about as many real life things as we can, because it actually gives the child a better imagination than if they're continually bombarded with fantasy-based subjects, because the child's not actually creating that. It is being dictated to. So being able to imagine a dinner party or a tea party with their friends, and they're talking, and you can't, you know, my 3-year-old at the moment it's all monster trucks, but when you sit back and listen to him, what he's talking, the conversations he's having, and his imagination at play, the richness and depth that comes from that, rather than playing out something that you might see on Paw Patrol, is a lot deeper, because it's literally his imagination. It's not a conversation that's come from anywhere else. It doesn't mean that, you know, there is still the imagination is beautiful, and you're not taking away a core part of a child's childhood. It's just coming when it's developmentally appropriate. So the materials in the classroom, as I've spoken about before, and if you go to a tour in a Montessori setting, you'll be able to see that these materials have an isolated concept. So they have a purpose. So something like the spindle box in the maths area is literally to teach the child that 0 means nothing. And so when we when we do that activity, all we're trying to do is show the child how to count from 1 to 9, but then they see that there's nothing in the 0 part, and they're like, there's nothing in there. It's like, that's because 0 means nothing. They think it's magic. And you know, it is, but it allows for black and white to be in that Montessori, in that maths materials especially, that you can really get deep concepts. They make sense. And if nothing else happened in the school setting, if Montessori maths was in everything, we would have a different outcome for children in mathematics. The materials in the environment are aesthetically pleasing, and they're made of natural materials wherever possible. And that's because, as a human tendency, we are drawn to beautiful things, and that beautiful means different to everybody. But, you know, when we touch something that is wooden over plastic, you can feel what I call the soul in it. You can feel the difference. We can connect with it better. The materials invite repetition and movement. Most of them need the child to do something and to repeat an action rather than press a button and it do it for them. They move from concrete to abstract. So we want a child to be able to show, you know, 8 apples, 6 carrots before they're counting 1 to 10 with the numbers. So the concrete would be the quantity, and the abstract would be the symbol that represents that quantity. So the actual number 8 would go with the 8 apples. We want to know that the child understands that concrete element first. Provide opportunity for language acquisition. So we talk as much as we can in that first 3 years of life. And then when we're doing the presentations in a children's house, we don't want to talk as much, because we want the child to take in what we're doing and focus on our hands and the lesson that we're giving, and then for them to put that into action. Meet the child's developmental needs, absolutely. Self-teaching and self-correcting where possible. So a lot of materials don't need the adult to tell them if they're right or wrong. They usually provide indirect preparation for later work. So in the photo there, you can see she's using an eyedropper, and as much as, you know, there is obviously the skill to get the detergent out with that, it's also the pincer grip, which is indirect preparation for writing. There is only one of something, so we don't have lots of the same thing in a Montessori setting. This allows for children to learn how to wait and to share materials, and also how to develop impulse control and alternative thinking. So I can't do that right now, but I can do this while I wait. And you can see the beauty in the interactions. When that child's finished with the work, most of the time they'll go and get their friend who wanted it, and then they can come over and do it. So it's different to a lot of spaces where there's, you know, lots of the same truck to avoid conflict, but you don't actually need to have the conflict. So we talk about sleep. So the floor bed in a Montessori setting, this allows the child freedom of movement from the start, independence to take themselves to bed if they want to, We recommend following SIDS sleep guidelines for families. However, I did with my 3-year-old. We used the floor bed, and it was an incredible journey, and seeing him have that freedom to put himself to sleep and get up when he needs to. Those sort of things have been amazing. When getting ready for sleep, that routine is really important. So it helps a child to feel safe and secure and knowing what to expect next. So I'm not talking about what Tizzy Hall might talk about, which is the 7 o'clock bus. Don't miss, the child has to be done by 7 o'clock. For my family and our life, we're not always ready for 7 o'clock. So we do the same routine before going to bed, but that might be at 7 o'clock. Well, that might be at 8 o'clock when we get home from soccer training, but the same things happen to get that child ready for sleep. And in your spaces for sleep, we try to use calm colours and decor as much as possible to allow for that serenity in the sleeping space. When we talk about dressing, clothes in the place the child can access themselves, a small seat to help. That's not just for when you're young, that's also for when you're really old. Having a seat to help you get dressed and undressed is really helpful. Clothing encouraging independence. So in these first few years, especially the first 3, we talk about, use elastic where possible rather than, buttons, because the children can't do it on their own. And then when they're toilet training as well, it's really difficult if buttons are in the way, whereas elastic up and down is really important for their independence, and giving them choice in what they wear. When we talk about play spaces, so I've done quite a lot of toy room makeovers for people, but when we talk about play spaces, we want to use shelves rather than toy boxes. Toy boxes encourage clutter, and it's a space for it's overwhelming for children. So they might be looking for a green car and they're tipping out every box trying to find this one thing, and then trying to pack that up. It's really overwhelming for them. Cull, you do not need a lot of the things that, like I said before, you actually really don't need anything. The things you do have should have a purpose, a problem to be solved with that control of error, so that the child does not require an adult to tell them if they're wrong. Child size where possible. So furniture needs to be at the height of the children. They must be able to reach things off those shelves and put them back without the adult. Calming, you don't need a lot of things on the wall or items hanging from the roof. Create that calm environment wherever you can. And movement, allowing the space for children to move freely. These all make a successful Montessori environment. So this is a picture of a relatively traditional playroom. The IKEA shelves you'll see in lots and lots of houses. But when there's too much stuff, it can get to this, and it's overwhelming for us as adults. It's 10 times worse for the child. Whereas when you have a prepared environment and have things out that meet that child's interests at that time and their developmental needs, it's a lot calmer. And when all of those baskets were to be tipped over, it is not difficult to put them away. This is another smaller room. It's those IKEA bins added again. But, it gets like this, and it can take not even 5 minutes to feel like this is how your room ends up the whole time. It might just be 2 shelves out, because these are the things that your child is currently using over and over again at this point in time. Maria Montessori says, education is a natural process carried out by the child and is not acquired by listening to words, but by experiences in the environment. Setting up your space at home or in the childcare setting, taking in these principles changes the way children learn, and it's incredible. So some things, I know I'm running over time almost, but some things you can do at home. Reading aloud is extremely important. It's said that you expose children to 3 times as many vocabulary words as if you were just talking to them. The biggest thing I can say is don't rush the child. Disrupting a child who's focused on a task destroys the opportunity for lengthening their attention span and is disrespectful to the child. It's not the child's fault most of the time when we're in a rush. That's because we've scheduled ourselves to be so busy, and they're along for the ride with us, but we're not giving them the time and space to get themselves ready or to finish the work that they're on. And that might be building something in Lego. Give them the time, and if you need to, give them a longer warning beforehand. But you know, we really need to allow time for children. Let them help in the kitchen as much as it's really, really hard and annoying. You know, it can be scrubbing potatoes, carrots, making meatballs with you, beating eggs, washing the lettuce is something that, you know, an 18-month-old can do. Mixing pancake mixture, all of those things are things that children can do. In these pictures here, this is when Liam's about 6, or what have we, yeah, 5 and 6. You know, he's put his own singlet on, it's on the wrong way, but I don't ever fix it because he's trying. And he'll eventually learn because somebody else will tell him. But I don't need to take that want or need of independence away from him. You can let them help with the housework, but never fix what they've done in front of them. Reality-based experiencing, so visiting farms, the tip, botanic gardens, all of these things that the children are interested in. Imagination is experience-driven in children under 6. So taking them to as many of these things as possible is invaluable for their development. And what I said before about not fixing something, you know what it's like if, what it feels like when somebody, I know what it's like for me, or used to be, when I'd pack the dishwasher and then my husband would come and fix it because I didn't do it right. I just stopped doing it. It's worse for children and how that feels internally. Limit television. I'm not against screen time at all, but allowing for children to be bored is extremely important. And as I said as an example before, going for a walk with no destination is one of the simplest things you can do that costs nothing, but changes the world and your relationship between your child and you. Give children the chance for repetition, to try something over and over. Sit on your hands and observe. Instead of problem solving or fixing that puzzle or getting involved too quickly, learn how to observe. Being friendly with error. So if they spill milk, talking about how you can clean it up rather than getting angry at them for that mistake. Developing a family hobby, creating a lifelong bond together. Those are things that you can do at home that meet the developmental needs of your child. There's also another thing that we can share on the Facebook page, Michaela, which is just a list of tasks that children can help at home, which is age appropriate as well. For those parents who are looking for a place of service, you can reach out to Michaela directly. But we are now at the question part. If there's anybody who would like to ask some questions. I think you should be able to take yourself off mute if you have any questions. How about you, Michaela?
Oh, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yeah. Thank you for the presentation. One of my questions would be around how long, I suppose, if you're feeling uncomfortable about letting your child, say, do the washing up or folding clothes, how long would you go without, so you said not correcting them, but how long would you then show them the next step if the first time they didn't get it right?
So the next time there's washing, yeah. You might show them how to match the socks or how to fold a towel. All of those things can be done that next time round, but don't do it while they're there. So if they want to help with the washing, maybe the first thing that you do is getting them to match socks. Yeah. Because that's an easier task to do. That shouldn't affect, you know, those of us who might really like to fold towels a certain way. And then as that child develops, or if they stay interested, giving them more and more tasks that they can help you with. But maybe rather than it being the whole washing, it's part of, and it could be as simple as sorting the clothes out for whose are whose, and then them putting their own clothes away in their room. There's lots of different ways you can allow for that interest. Yeah, that's how I would do it.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Hello, can you hear me?
I sure can.
Hey, we've sort of been following Montessori loosely, I suppose, for a couple of years. We've been, reading all the books, and I'm partway through The Absorbent Mind at the moment. It's really content heavy.
It's really, really hard to take in all of it.
Yeah, I feel like I'm missing a lot of things. I'll have to read it a few times. But I think one of the biggest struggles I've had is obviously like preparing the environment. I can wrap my mind around, how to speak to the kids, and minimizing, flashy toys and stuff like that. We don't actually have a lot of toys anymore, but I guess I'm wondering, so how do you start with preparing the environment and getting the appropriate tools for your child to learn?
Yeah. How old are your children?
I've got a 4-year-old boy and a 16-month-old boy.
Yeah, so you've got them in two different planes of development at the same time can be really hard.
Really hard.
Playroom or individual rooms, how is your environment at home?
So currently they have their own bedrooms. They both sleep on the floor, on a bed on the floor. We have like an open living space, and so they've got like a toy corner sort of thing, where they've got a pickler, a shelf with some books, and a few toys. But really, they don't spend any time there. They would rather play Duplo or Lego or go outside or get up in the learning tower in the kitchen, which I guess is, fine. But I feel like they're missing out on some really important Montessori aspect.
Are they with you full time or are they in care? How's that arranged?
They are with me most of the time, but 2 days a week they're at a daycare.
Yeah. Okay. So it's really this can be because especially your 4-year-old is in the main where the materials matter the most. But it's really expensive to set up a Montessori environment at home.
It is. Yeah.
Yeah, so there are things that you can definitely do for your 16-month-old that you can make yourself, like some of the object permanent boxes, things like that.
Yeah.
But really, if you were investing in materials for your 4-year-old, the things that I would talk about is the movable alphabet. You'll get the value out of that long term and past the first 6 years a lot of the time. Sandpaper letters you could probably get, and because you can use them for your youngest as well, so that would be a good investment. But really have a look more so at the language area and then some of the maths stuff, but that can also be really expensive. But you can do that, the same concepts with things that you have at home.
Okay.
So it's really understanding that concrete before abstract. So what you want is to, give me 6 apples. Can you give me 3 sultanas? Using that type of language allows for you to understand that child has the concrete understanding, and then you can introduce the abstract. It's the same with letters. The sound is the concrete, so a, b, k, and then the ABC is the abstract that represents that sound. So learning that side of things rather than just having the materials, because it is expensive. And then obviously if you've got access to a Montessori, a daycare or setting, then that's obviously beneficial. But if you don't, really focus on those fundamental things and what you're doing at home. So the language you're using, allowing them to help you cook, all of those things would be really beneficial for you. Because without a children's house, they are going to miss some of it. But Montessori is an aid to life. It is about life long term, not just materials in a classroom.
Yeah.
For your the Montessori Toddler by Simone Davies is a really good book for you.
Yeah.
And for your 4-year-old, the absorbent mind is a lot of Maria Montessori's writing is really heavy and really hard to understand and takes a long time to get through. There's a free parenting course that we have online as well on I AM Education that you can sign up to. It's free, but that'll go through some of the fundamentals as well.
Okay, cool. I was actually thinking about studying the diploma of Montessori early education, so I might still look into it.
Oh, definitely. If it's something that you love to do, I would 100% do it.
Okay. Thank you.
Awesome. Was there anybody else there who would like to ask some questions? Lisa, audiobooks are always a good idea. Any type of language in any format is valuable. Anyone else with any questions? Brooke?
Yeah, I had a question about the language, how you said not to use the phrase good job. I didn't, is there room for like encouragement or words of affirmation or anything like that?
Absolutely. So what we don't want to use is words that are a straight out judgment, which good job is. Yeah. But say, like, for instance, a child brings up a painting to me in the classroom. I'm not going to go, oh my God, that's amazing. What I want to do is, oh, I can see that you've used purple and green. Would you like to tell me all about it?
Yeah. Okay.
Still a positive interaction, but open-ended, and is a conversation starter, and the ability for the child to tell me what they've done, not me assuming what they've painted or telling them that it's great. They can tell me about it.
Yeah, awesome.
I might put, there is a sort of a JPEG image of like alternative language you can use. I'll chuck that on the Townsville Montessori page as well, Facebook page as well.
Great, thank you.
Too easy. Somebody had their hand up. I don't know how to do the handy uppy thing. If you've got a question, it might just be easier to take yourself off mute. All right. So if there's nobody else, I would like to say thank you for joining us tonight. It's always wonderful to talk about Montessori with families. And if you've got any questions, you can jump on the Townsville Montessori page or on I AM Montessori, because that's to me directly, and I can answer any questions that you might have. But if you're around North Queensland, go and have a look at a children's house. Even if you can't send your children to Townsville Montessori, seeing a children's house in action can help you embed Montessori at home a lot better, because you actually can see the full setting happening, and why, the why in action, which is always the most important thing. All right, Michaela, well, if there's nothing else, guys, thank you so much, and always here if anybody needs anything.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Too easy. Thanks, guys. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.